Welcome everybody, so I am back and bringing you guys a brand new movie review. This is going to be for Alita Battle Angel. So if you see an image of Alita Battle Angel behind me, that is the movie that we're going to be talking to you guys about today. This movie stars Rosa Salazar as Alita, Christopher Waltz as Doc Ito. This movie also has Jennifer Connelly as Shirin, also has Marshall Ali as Vector, as well as Keenan Johnson as Hugo. This movie also stars Ed Skrein as Zapan or Zapan, whatever you like to call him in this movie. You know, this is based off of the manga of the same name as well as sort of the Japanese anime, and I really do happen to like Alita Battle Angel a lot. This is one of those movies that I turn to when I'm bored, when I've got nothing better to do, and I think this movie only gets better over time, and I think this is one of those movies that's going to be studied and critiqued for generations to come in terms of the filmmaking and sort of the technology used to create some of the CGI spectacle that is Alita. Normally I don't like, CGI films because of the fact that they over-rely on the CGI aspect of this, but this is a movie that is produced by James Cameron and is directed by Robert Rodriguez, and I really do like some of the other movies that Robert Rodriguez has done in the past, like Sin City, El Mariachi, and some of the other older films that he's done. Given that sort of stance, I really do forgive them for using a lot of CGI in this movie. There's no possible way they could have done this without the use of a mixture between CGI as well as sort of the live action sets and the practical effects and stuff like that in this film. This movie is a lot like Captain Marvel, and I think that's why the audiences kind of pinned them up against each other when these movies came out, which I think is kind of stupid in a way because now that the properties are both owned by Marvel and Fox, they kind of merged, and so they're under the same roof once again. I think that there's room for both of these characters in the cinematic universe that, they kind of rely upon in Disney and stuff like that, and I think that people should definitely give Alita a chance if they haven't seen this movie. This movie pretty much starts off where you see Alita as sort of a naive girl. Doc Ito finds her in sort of a trash heap. He finds her skull, and he later tries to give her, cyborg body parts in order to kind of rebuild her and make her better and create a better version of Alita than she was before. He thinks that there's something special about this girl, and eventually you figure out that there is. Alita is a naive young woman. She's pretty much trying to figure out who she was, what her name was. She doesn't even remember her name, which I think is a scary thought, to kind of lose all aspects of yourself, including what your name was, and especially what she was fighting for in the past. I think is a really strong characteristic of who she is as a person, especially as a character. This movie has a lot of sort of hero's journey moments within this film. You got Hugo, who's this guy that's trying to strip these cyborgs for parts and stuff like that. He thinks that what he's doing is right because he's trying to get to this sort of city in the sky. It's pretty much like Elysium, where you've got the rich elites that live in this city in the sky, where they're kind of managing the people below them, which live on this planet that's pretty much been desolate for years. There's only one city, which is the city that they live in, that is pretty much capable of housing life and stuff like that, and that's where these poor sort of class of citizens live. Pretty much a first class movie, and you see that a lot in this film. You've also got cyborgs that are kind of going rogue, and that is where you get sort of Doc Ito's character come in. He is pretty much hunting them down and trying to stop them from kind of going rogue because they're hunting down sort of other cyborgs as well as humans. The cyborgs and the humans don't really get along in this movie. You kind of see a little bit of tension between them, especially after this war that they fought, where pretty much some of society had been killed during that whole thing, and you see sort of like these floating cities kind of just crashing to the ground and stuff like that, and yet there's still one that's left standing that everybody's trying to fight in order to kind of get to. There's also a backstory where there's this giant ship that kind of is derelict and submerged under water, which Alita will go to later in the film. And that's one of the only sort of gripes that I have about this movie, is when you see sort of that scene, she's capable of going underneath the water even though she's a cyborg, and she's got electronics and stuff in her arms, so you'd think that maybe they would get damaged, especially if she went in the water, but not for Alita. She's pretty much good at everything. You see at the beginning Hugo try and train her for the sport that's called motorball, and motorball is basically like rugby meets rollerblading and soccer and sort of hockey and all these other sports kind of combined into one, and Alita is pretty much infatuated with this sport from the moment that she kind of learns about it. She kind of wants to do it and kind of prove to herself that she can actually be a professional just like the other cyborg robots that are in this movie. And there's even a cyborg played by Jai Courtney who's pretty much the best in the league. He's pretty much undefeated, and you see a little bit of his character throughout this film, which I think is interesting because he was promised that if there were other Alita sequels, which I definitely hope there are in the future, he'd have a bigger part to play in the future films. And so I like Jai Courtney. I think he's been given some pretty shitty parts in the past. I don't think that his acting career is going to be stunted by things like Terminator Genesis and other films that he's been in the past, but I don't think those movies help his cause. I think that this is one of those movies that definitely does. This is one of those movies where every one of the cast of characters that are in this film definitely feel like they're a part of this universe, definitely have their time to shine, and there's a lot of really great moments, especially action sequences that happen throughout this film. Jennifer Connelly is this sort of woman that's kind of working on these cyborgs. She's pretty much caring for these cyborgs and wants to help them and kind of have these, even though they're really dangerous sort of mob boss like robots that are kind of going out and killing people, she definitely views that these are kind of like her children. She's working on these robotics to kind of please her boss Vector, who she's also sleeping with, which there's kind of an interracial kind of relationship with Vector and Jennifer Connelly's character, which I don't really mind that much in movies and stuff like that. I think that's a really sort of, great way to kind of introduce a new layer to this character, that she's kind of sleeping with the guy that's kind of running the business, and she's trying to make her way up as well. And you sort of see them kind of clash together when she's trying to help out Alita throughout this movie. At one point, there's an issue of a bounty ordered on Keenan Johnson's head, or Hugo. He's pretty much going against Vector in this movie. He kind of starts to realize that what he's doing is not necessarily the right way to go about things. He starts to form a relationship with Alita, and so he starts to go away from the business and away from the practice of strip mining these cyborgs for parts, and so that pretty much places a bounty on his head. Ed Skrein is pretty much hunting him down, and you kind of learn the fact that Hugo knows a little bit of parkour, which I don't know where he kind of learned this, because this is the future, so obviously there's willing suspension of disbelief. He probably learned it from someplace, but he's kind of run away from Ed Skrein's character. Ed Skrein stabs him with one of his swords and stuff like that, and Ed Skrein has played Francis in the Deadpool universe, and he's just as good of a character in this. He plays the sort of antagonist to our protagonist in the film, and I think he does a really good job. He's not as funny or humor enticing as he was in Deadpool, but I think his character really does a great job in this movie, and I honestly think this is one of his best roles and stuff like that, which I've seen him in other things in the past, such as not only Deadpool, but Clash of the Titans was another movie that he was in, and that was kind of one of his earlier movies, so I kind of judge him based on sort of his growth in terms of an actor, but I think he does a really good job. You know, Rosa Salazar, she went through intense training for Alita Battle Angel, especially some of the fight sequences, like what happens in Motorball, where pretty much all of the sort of Motorball players are pretty much ordered to hit on Alita, and they're trying to kill Alita because they want to strip mine her for parts, and Vector pretty much wants her dead because he's pretty much interfering with his plans, and his plans especially with Hugo, and sort of they're kind of going at each other, and there's this awesome sort of spectacular Motorball sequence, which I think everybody should definitely watch, either on streaming service or actually go out and purchase this movie, because I definitely think this is worth your time and money. And you sort of see that really cool action sequence, and kind of leads to Alita sort of defending herself and eventually defeating these guys. You know, there's also a really cool bar fight sequence with Alita where she pretty much takes out a bunch of people in a bar sequence, and it's really reminiscent of something like the Terminator. I was actually thinking of that when I was watching it in the theater. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like the bar fight sequence in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, where Arnold is kind of taking out pretty much everybody in the club, even though he's a cybernetic organism. Alita is also a cybernetic organism, and she is pretty much taking out these guys left and right, and she almost pretty much loses her life in that battle. Throughout this movie, you see sort of a hero's journey moment between Alita. She doesn't know if she wants to fight for the humans or pretty much become one of the characters like Ed Skrein, who's pretty much out there trying to collect bounties and stuff like that. But you see at one point in time, she almost tries to kill Hugo, confronting him on his acts, especially strip mining these cyborgs for parts and stuff like that. And so you don't know if she's going to side with them or she's going to go with Doc Ito, because Doc Ito is pretty much acting like the mentor figure in this movie. He's pretty much like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or sort of the Yoda in the Star Wars universe, trying to build Alita to become a better human being or even a better cyborg. She eventually learns that she fought in this giant galactic war, and eventually she pretty much lost her memory due to that fact, and so she starts to fight for things that are right and things that are just in this world. She pretty much takes Hugo's head and defies sort of the bounty that's on his head, and that's when you see Hugo pretty much being put on sort of the body of another cyborg. It's kind of poetic that this guy that was once human is now turned into pretty much machine, and I think that was a very poetic way to kind of formulate their love for each other over time. And you see them try and climb one of these big giant sort of cables leading towards this giant city in the sky, and that's when pretty much Hugo dies, and it pretty much distraughts Alita. She's pretty much now, you know, upset over the fact that she just tried to help this guy that she had kind of grown to love, and to see him pretty much get ripped to pieces by this sort of cable system and the safety defense network that they have for people trying to escape onto this platform really distraughts her to the point where she now has to kind of fight not only for herself but for the memory of Hugo, so that one day she can kind of avenge what happened to them. All the while she's kind of, you know, dealing with sort of who she is as a character, and I think this is a really great story. I think there's a lot of really great things to love about this movie, especially the use of practical and CG. Far too often in these movies they just rely on CGI because it's really a crutch for these companies, because they can easily do stuff with the computers, which is something that I don't really like that much, like I've said before. But this movie really does utilize the practical effects in the CGI, and I think James Cameron is known for pretty much doing that. You know, this was a really big passion project for James Cameron. He was originally set to direct this, but like I said before, Robert Rodriguez took over, and he was pretty much like, I want to make the movie that you see in your head. I want to make the movie that you would pretty much be making if you were the one to direct this. And I think that's one of the things that sets this movie apart from Terminator, which Tim Miller would later direct. And I think that's really funny because Tim Miller was the director for Terminator Dark Fate, but he was also the director for Deadpool, and they're completely opposite films, whereas one you actually grew to like, the other one you kind of hate, which is sort of Terminator Dark Fate. I don't think that this is a movie that ever gets old. I don't think that this is a movie that, with action, the special effects, the story, that this is a movie that people are going to forget. And I think this is one of those movies that generations after me are going to really like. I think this is a movie that generations after me are going to study in film classes. There's a lot of really great moments in this movie, and there's a lot of things when you watch this movie on repeat viewings, you kind of learn a little bit more about Alita. You kind of learn about the world that she lives in. This is really great, fantastic world building. Every single actor in this movie does a fantastic job. Like I said, you know, none of these characters feel weak. None of these characters feel like they don't matter. I think this is one of those movies that is going to have sort of a cult standing, because this movie pretty much grew to have a cult following upon its release. They're pitting each other against, you know, Captain Marvel, and the Captain Marvel fans really hated Alita, and the Alita fans really hated Captain Marvel, but I'm one of the fans that really did like Alita Battle Angel, and I think this movie definitely deserves an A, not just because of the story, but because of the characters, the acting, the visual effects, the music of this movie is really, really great. I think Christopher Waltz does a really fantastic job in this movie, and he does a fantastic job in everything that he's in. I think Rosa Salazar also does a really great job portraying sort of the character Alita, Alita. When I first saw the trailer for this movie, I was really skeptical of it just because of the fact that, I saw the bug eyes of Alita. I saw sort of the CGI aspect. I didn't know how well this was going to translate to screen. I thought this might fail due to the fact that they would rely heavily on CGI. But when I saw this in the theater, the visual effects looked a little bit better. They looked a little bit more perfected as time goes on. In a lot of these movies, the CGI that you see originally in the trailers are often unfinished. They're often not polished, not perfected. And I think this is one of those instances where you shouldn't judge a book based off its cover, because sometimes a trailer can make a movie look really good or it can make a movie look really bad depending on how you see it. And when you go see it, it's a completely different movie, and that's definitely the case with Alita. So I would have to give Alita an A+. I definitely think this movie deserves it. I think that if you're interested in filmmaking, interested in the story or the universe or this manga as a whole, you're going to find something to like about this, and you're going to find something to like about Alita as you go along. Like I said before, whenever they say you don't like strong female characters, I usually turn to Alita Battle Angel, I usually turn to Wonder Woman, I usually turn to Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor, and those are some pretty awesome strong female women in movies that I really do like. And I don't think that there is sort of any negative to the story. And the one negative I had was with that derelict ship I told you earlier, where Alita kind of swims underneath the water and stuff, and none of her electronics are damaged or anything. But I think if they made sequels to Alita, they could kind of explain how she's able to do some of these feats in future movies. And I think that this movie definitely deserves a sequel. I don't think that you should just stop at this one, because this definitely does set up some questions that don't get answered within this film, but it also sets up things that they do answer in this movie. So I have to give Alita a really high ranking just because of the fact that I do like James Cameron. Yes, he's kind of hit or miss these days because of the movies that he produces or directs, but I think that this is one of his great films that he kind of allowed Robert Rodriguez to do whatever he wanted in this film. And Robert Rodriguez pretty much was like, I'm just going to do sort of your singular vision, something that you've been kind of obsessing over for years. And I think this is one of those instances where it really turned out for the better. And I don't think that without Robert Rodriguez's help, this movie would have turned out as good as it possibly did. I think that everybody did a great job. So there's really nothing that I can say that's really bad about Alita Battle Angel. So I would highly recommend that you guys go out to see this. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think about Alita, what you think about the story, what you think about the characters within this universe. I think there's a lot of room for growth, especially in the Alita Battle Angel franchise. And I think that Disney would be stupid not to kind of make a sequel to this movie, since there are people that are really big fans of this franchise. Now, would they kind of go and ruin it and put sort of their SJW politics in this movie if they did a sequel? I don't know. This movie came around in sort of a right time where people are just looking for things to enjoy. People are just looking for a really good story and a really good film, and Alita was definitely something that kind of filled that void that people were looking for. And especially me in the theater, I really loved every minute that I was watching this movie. I didn't know what to expect. I knew that this is part of a manga franchise, but I never read the manga. I never delved into these characters before, and I came out actually liking this movie. So hats off to the cast and crew, and especially James Cameron and Robert Rodriguez for making this movie, because I definitely think that you guys deserve all the credit that you've been given. And as always, guys, rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.